Good evening. The title's deliberately provocative, and if people have a problem with it, it's satire. That means, apparently, in current lingo, that if it's if it seems bad, it's really good, and you have to ignore how bad it might seem. But why do I have what? Why am I talking about you know tears, anti woke tears or something silly like that? I guess I've heard so much about it that it just seems to me to be an exercise in. It's like they become the fun police. Anytime I want to have fun with something, I end up, having to deal with a whole bunch of people, making comments about how woke it is, how inclusive it is, how diverse it is, as if these are bad things. You know, if there's one thing I go to a movie for, it's to step out of step out of my relatively isolated life. I mean, let me just be blunt about this. I'm not the world's most social person. I'm not the world's richest person. So, a lot of the joys that I have available to me are kind of close in. Right over here to my right, there is a shelf full of videos. Uh, the first one on the top shelf is a movie called First Man. You may or may not have heard about that movie. Apparently, it offended a lot of conservatives who became offended because the show doesn't have a a scene devoted to the planting of the U.S. flag. It is shown, and a number of scenes of flags are shown, but it's not focused on as an event, which is not too big a bad thing if you consider that this movie, First Man, is more of a biopic of the man who first stepped on the moon. But I would observe that the last part of the film probably would make many people proud to be an American. That's the thing. This is a deed that itself kind of showed the best in in American technology and American ingenuity. I mean, it's not for nothing that that Nolan chooses to horrify us by having some school administrator talk about how, oh, the moon landing was faked to force the Russians to bankrupt themselves with their program, their space program, which actually they didn't bankrupt themselves with their space program. They bankrupted themselves with their unsafe nuclear energy program, which and also a needless war in an Asian country, which tends to happen a lot to the major powers. We had our Vietnam, they had their Afghanistan. Let me take these off. They're too reflective. Yeah, I need them for reading these days. Um, but let me be blunt about this. I hear so much about woke, and it seems to always accompany films that are. I mean, well, let's start with some things here. Recently, the Daily Wire, led by a gentleman literally named Boring, released a film called Lady Ballers, which is apparently about what a terrible thing it is to allow trans people to um, participate in girls' sports. Now, we can talk about whether there should be some accommodations for the physical aspects of these that some of these people have. I mean, but the irony of it is, when they say we shouldn't have gender affirming treatment, the irony of it is if they gave these people gender affirming treatment, it would actually reduce the muscle and bone growth that would later pose a problem for them in having an equal sort of performance with the other girls. So if they gave people what they want, they would remove one of their chief objections off the table. If they treated people like they were supposed to be treated, many of our problems would have never arisen. If we hadn't trapped so many minorities in the inner cities in late 20th century discrimination, then it wouldn't the issues if we hadn't encouraged at the same time. There was a simultaneous policy of discouragement of black people and Latinos moving out from the inner cities, and a simultaneous encouragement of white people to move out to the suburbs. And part of the idea with this, and this will sound nasty because it is that folks wanted the to preserve the white people at the expense of the colored people. And if that sounds bad, it's because it is bad. And I think a recognition that some of these things sound bad because they are bad is part of what being woke, if we're going to use that word, is about. It's about not being asleep to the actual implications of many of the things we did as, that white people like me. Look at me. I'm not just white. I'm the kind of white that sunburns in 15 minutes. So, I think a significant part of being woke is understanding that we have a great deal of karma going against us, if you will. I'm sorry to abuse the religious term in a colloquial way, but I think it's a good way of expressing a sense that sometimes what we do boomerangs on us. So you curse somebody out, the curse bounces off of them and hits you. So we don't like, the drug epidemic. There's a good deal of evidence that, a lot of what how many people learn to be criminals because we sent them up for minor drug offenses? How many people were deprived of the very sort of parentage, two parents at home, a working parent. How many how many people were deprived of good fortune? How many were sent into spirals of substance abuse? How many were had their potential in terms of education, in terms of employment hindered by this? And then the additional problems of the flight of capital, as well as people, of tax dollars as well as people, out from the city cores, which create huge problems in terms of maintaining infrastructure, in terms of all kinds of things that we still deal with to this day. So people did a lot of stupid things for prejudicial reasons. They valued appearance, literal appearance issues over practical issues. Now, I'm not, I can understand people being perhaps a bit um, concerned about having to walk on eggshells. I've never been a fan of people trying to use, you know, I can understand where people object to political correctness. I can understand where people object to a lot of uh, sort of the attempts to try and force language to make it impossible, to say something that's prejudiced or something like that. At a certain point, language must evolve from its more imperfect, you know, from its more imperfect past. Um, it's, I guess the best way to put it is you, I guess the best way to put it is that, well, we talk about, artist visions, we talk about, the, I mean, it's like, I'm looking for the title and everything. I guess a great deal of this video, as planned, to the extent that I do plan videos, um, is about how much we try and force a certain sort of, how much we try and force people to make stuff that we like. How much sort of bullying goes on in the comments sections, in the articles, how much we're really trying to kind of force a certain perspective on art. The I say this as somebody who's who might be uncharitably described as a failed artist at the moment. A person who wanted to be a filmmaker but never really got himself started doing that. a person who wants to be a big writer, but he's finished the work but hasn't yet published it. Because he's still trying to improve things. You know, and it's like I understand what it's like to creatively struggle with your output, to find it difficult to start things again, and you know and to get back on the horse and take another ride. I've been trying to prepare something, and the preparation has kind of overwhelmed me. So that's the state I'm in at the moment. A bit of a writer's block there. But it helps if you've actually done the work uh, to come around and do the criticism. And I feel I've sort of earned some degree of ability to critique how people engage storytellers and everything. Let me tell you, right off. I'm going to tell you that if George R. R. Martin is taking forever to finish his book, you are partly to blame. And why is that? Because there's nothing that will slow a person down more than a whole bunch of people telling them you've got to come up with it in a hurry. You know, there's some sort of natural human inclination, especially if you're a writer, where it's like, all right, I'm going to try and make this thing, but I have to make it the best thing possible, and everybody's waiting on me, so I've got to concentrate even more on trying to make it the best thing possible. Because if I cut it short and it's horrible, people will say, "Oh, why did you spend so much time on it?" It gets to be, and people don't understand that to do actual filmmaking, to do actual writing and novel writing in particular, especially the doorstops that George R. R. Martin has made, it is work. It is not all play and fun and games. There's a nice play and fun and games aspect to this kind of work. It's better than digging ditches for a living. Um, but it is work. If you want to make something good, if you want to do something good, it's something you've actually got to commit some time and effort to doing. I'm currently trying to figure out, I'm a fantasy writer at heart, so I'm currently trying to figure out a way to kind of give the magic system some sort of relative, to say, okay, this much power gets you this much magic, this much power gets you even more. Like with this, you can lift 10 pounds with your mind. With this, you can lift a ton with your mind, and trying to figure out which characters would be able to do how much, and trying to figure that out. So believe me when I say it, I am big. I have a note-taking program that I have utterly filled with tons of notes. Everything from character profiles to ability profiles to languages to you know descriptions of different classes of magic user, different classes of spirits. It's enormous. It's perhaps even bigger than the work that I've written, and that's saying something because I've got hundreds and hundreds of pages written. It's just uh, but it helps me knowing this, seeing this, having used this, and actually having created a somewhat coherent story out of it to understand that there is a that I mean, one of the things when I was back in the honors program in Baylor, one of the things that I wrote about for my for my honors thesis, the mystery and the design was the name of it. Um, I wanted to do something about the. It's like I wanted to take a look at storytelling from another perspective, from a cognitive perspective. And so I've developed a lot of that theory over time, and further developing it, I've come to a conclusion, and that is that storytelling is not simply I download information into your brain. Storytelling is reconstruction. I show you images, and those images lead you to create. I write text, and you read that text, and you interpret that text, and interpreting the text, and your brain reconstructs something out of that text. Or you watch a movie, and you take those images, and in a much more subtle way reconstruct something from those images, and that becomes another sort of you get these convincing portrayals of alternative realities, and well, it's that's the nature of it, though. You're not just simply downloading information to your brain. It's not simply the literal image or the literal word. Something is being you are taking your experiences, your sensory memories, your your sense of how things work, and you are taking that and using that to reconstruct a story according to a pattern that we, the authors, the filmmakers, provide you. It's sort of like a guided dream, a guided reconstruction. And it's important to understand it as a reconstruction because what that gets you is a kind, it becomes more important. The feel of things becomes more important because what you're trying to bring across is an experience, an understanding of something, rather than trying to recreate reality, reinvent the wheel of reality around you. It's important to understand it as communication, as messages designed to provoke the reconstruction process in the brain. So it's important to understand it in this way because when you think about it as in this sort of creator's way, you kind of I think you kind of get errors. You kind of get you kind of start thinking that It's all about I have to recreate everything authentically, everything in detail. When in reality, the brain is doing an awful lot to fill in the blanks, to construct the reality behind what they see, and so on and so forth. And the most important efforts you can make are those that even if you're not actually. I mean, here's the thing. Why can dreams be surreal? Why can dreams be so strange, and yet when you're having one, you really don't question it? Why? And the answer in part is because it's your brain is reconstructing things and then feeding them back to the parts of you that experienced them. And so it's like you are not simply, you're not some computer that's going, well, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is not accurate. No, one reason why it takes somebody like a um, one reason why they people have the script supervisor, a defined role on set, is that their job is to make sure that all the little details that we don't pay attention to, that we don't normally pay attention to, like, okay, like, look at this water bottle. If let me take a drink from it. All right, used to be up here, now it's down here. A script supervisor who's dealing with a scene that you're filming, you're going from the back of the scene from the front of the scene to the back of the scene. So you're going from the start where the water might be up here to the end when it might be up here because the character's been drinking from it. And so one thing that often gets noticed is when something gets done, some effect is made, and then suddenly it's undone. You know, a person who was killed in the last scene shows up in this new scene still alive because you probably got the idea. Oh, well, we can edit this part from over here and kind of put this in to kind of make the scene go on longer. But nobody looked and saw. Oh, look, there's this guy here. He died in the last scene. We need to take him out. And you know, it we live a lot of our lives. I mean, and a lot of us, we may not even notice that person. We might go, "Oh, that guy's there." Oh, a lot of people don't pick up on these things. There are people who do, and that's because everybody's got a different sort of you know in the engine of the brain. Not everybody has them tuned the same way. So it's I think there's something to be said for the change blindness, for the for what we don't notice, for what doesn't kind of register to us consciously when we watch a movie. Because quite frankly, we're not experiencing it in a or when we're reading, even when we're reading. Now you're less likely to have a situation where, well, I mean, it all depends. This is what editors are for. You know, didn't you have that character? Didn't that character die in the last scene? Oh yes. I hadn't done that yet in the previous draft, so all right, I'm gonna cut him out here. Okay, Uh, the thing about any kind of fiction is that being a reconstruction, being something where we're just kind of, you know, kit bashing, different lines, different scenes, and all these other things together, we often end up, creating a little bitty messes here and there. We Because we're human beings. Human beings have a limited sort of cognitive bandwidth. There's only so many things we can pay attention to at the same time, and it's like we've gone into our heads that it's all about some sort of creative vision, but it's as much about communicating with people as anything else. Now, part of what I'm responding to is I just got done watching this H Bomber Guide thing on director's cut. Um, I tend to be fairly lenient about director's cuts. And here's the thing. All right, let's talk about. I mean, I'm going to ramble here, so let me ramble in the direction of the whole thing of commercialism against art. It's one of those false dichotomies, which is not to say that studios and businesses don't interfere and sometimes do. They're a great detriment in their artists' work. They do. You got a bunch of people who hired experts to do something, and after they hire the experts to do something, they either second guess them out of insecurity, or they have some maybe perhaps legitimate concerns about whether or not uh, this thing will sell well if it's the way it is, or you just got somebody who needs to make their influence felt so they can brag about what influence they had on this hit film years later. But at the same time, let's acknowledge something. It's a business. And maybe some people can afford to make a dozen films that never make any money. Maybe if you're rich enough, you can do that. Not be concerned. You can just work with your vision. But otherwise, well, you want to make money because then you can make additional films. You can finance additional movies. You can attract investors saying, we made money with this film. Here, have some money. Bring us some money, and then we'll make something that'll make you money. It's not for nothing that our former Treasury Secretary, um, Stephen Mnuchin, was actually he was part of an outfit. I think he was part of Relativity Pictures. His names are in credits for a number of movies, and let's point out that uh, another Stephen guy, um, not Stephen Miller. That guy's he. I don't think he's got credits, but Bannon, Stephen Bannon. That guy has some credits to his name too. Um, at least some of them before he started being a much more partisan filmmaker. Um, which is something to keep in mind as you're dealing with these folks, is that a lot of them seem to like to use their producers of propaganda films, which should be a bit of a warning to you. You know, they're but getting back on topic, if I can remember it, um, you it's a business. What we're in, what I'd like to be in. It's a business, which means you have to appeal to an audience. But the funny thing is, you want to appeal to an audience. How do you appeal to an audience? Well, you use the craft of filmmaking to make something that appeals to them, that tells them a story. Now you can kind of get into your head that I'm an artistic filmmaker, that I make things. Sure thing. You make stuff, but what good is making the stuff if it doesn't draw in an audience? If you're an artist, don't you as an artist want to convey something? Is it are you just kind of laying down this sort of artistic thing? Here is my it's like that my Python skit. I've suffered for my art. Now it's your turn. um and that's after a painful off key tuning session on a guitar. Ding, 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 ding. But seriously, what is the purpose? What is the point of what you're doing? If you're an artist, you want to communicate with people. You want to pass on a vision to them. It's important to think of it as a relationship between you and somebody else, between you and the viewer, between you and the reader. I think it's important to understand that, because as I said before, taking the cognitive view, you're trying to get somebody to reconstruct a story in their heads. And to do that, you've got to have a kind of a good judgment on how they end up kind of coming to certain conclusions. You have to kind of, you know, work out how like how do you convey that a character is grieving? Now, one way to do it would be to have them do a whole wailing thing on screen and have them just go "Ah," out loud. But there are several movies where instead of having somebody just going "Ah," instead you get, which actually kind of plays a bit more dramatically, in part because the person can't unleash, they can't, you know, purge themselves of the emotion. It's too big and awful. They can't properly express it, which makes it seem, more painful. And that's part of the thing. It's also like, you ever seen a film where somebody's looking for something, or being stalked by somebody or whatever, and they just turn the corner and suddenly, oh, they're surprised by it. But it's such that if you really followed the optics of the camera, if you really followed how it would work in real life with the real human, you know, field of vision, which is capable of seeing things, 180 degrees to the side. It's like, okay, they should have seen that. However, it's not about what a real person would see in such a situation. It's about what the we as an audience reconstruct from the camera's point of view. The camera can't see it, then we can't see it. And so when the camera doesn't see it until it turns, oh my, it's like us not seeing something until we turn to see it. That's the thing. We're trying. It's not just merely a one-to-one replication of the senses. It is there's a sort of a grammar, a sort of a syntax to it that allows us to kind of get the experience across rather than a reality. Because really, we're not conveying a reality. You're not seeing reality right now. You are seeing sort of the ghost of a few moments in time on, what is it, December 11th. Let's see, December 11th. Is it Pearl Harbor Day? Or was that the 7th? Well, whichever it was. December 11th, 10:09 p.m. Which reminds me, I'm probably going to want to, cut this short at some point because, I got to go get milk. But the thing here that I think is important is to understand it as communication. That you're not creating an experience. You're not creating a world. You're not creating you are not God. When God creates rocks and stones and the natural laws that dictate how they are formed and how they move and whatever. We aren't burdened with so many things that we need to do. We don't have to create everything. We just have to create enough. We just have to artistically paint in enough details that the human brain starts to go, oh, a dragon, for example, or oh, a troll, creatures that don't exist, but yet we can thrill to the characters, escaping from them, fighting them, killing them, because even though it's completely fake, but we engage the audience by making that by filling enough of the blanks that their brains fill in the rest. Their brains create the rest. They, the audience, are co-creators of us. Which is part of what makes a lot of this whole woke stuff so unfortunate because it corrupts the co-creator role of the audience. It is it is the whole thing about calling a film woke or calling a studio woke or whatever is about getting people to deny the benefit of the doubt, deny their own sort of suspension of disbelief, to walk into the theater not thinking too much of the work. To It is about ruining people's fun, basically, so that they can't enjoy a film where there's a black person or women in the lead, where they have to be so self-conscious about it, so conscious about it all the time. That's the irony, really. Woke people watching that film, they probably wouldn't even note it too much. They say, "Oh, it's nice that you got three women in the lead, and two of them are minorities." But after that, I mean, if that, they might not even think that it's something to be that to be remarked upon. You know, but your average anti woke person, they'll look at that, they'll see that, and they'll go, "Look at that! Look at you know." They're pandering to the audience. They're pandering to black people. They're pandering to they use the word pander, a word associated with prostitution. A panderer is somebody who is a pimp. A pimp is somebody who panders. Who is, and it kind of brings a sense of the worst common denominator, as if these people we're dealing with are, as if it's an as if we're kind of appealing to an unworthy audience, that we really should get back to the respectable audience, which is a load of horse crap, to be sure. you know we're living in a society these days. I mean, we can talk about how Hollywood panders to everybody. Hollywood is There's an extraordinary amount of cynicism in Hollywood, and that will surprise precisely nobody over the age of 12. And that's the thing. To kind of get bent out of shape about this pandering over here. Oh, well, what about the pandering to you? What about the Rambo movies that got made, the Commando movies? Whole generation of movies meant to appeal to white people who like to see white guys, blowing away bad guys. You know, cop movies where it's more like a war film in terms of the level of violence than any accurate police procedural. Hollywood is, if anything, it's almost like a jealous lover who, having been pandered to for so long, having been plied and given kisses and whatever for so long, now it's bereft of that attention. Now they watch somebody giving somebody else that attention. How dare they? How dare they? It feels like I'm walking on broken glass. Which is a funny video to watch once you realize that the lead character opposite Annie Lennox is John Malkovich. I distinctly remember not remembering, not perceiving that was John Malkovich when I saw that as a kid. Which is funny because I did know of John Malkovich's existence. It was like, you know, I was just surprised to learn. Oh, that's John Malkovich playing the lover who jilted her. It's really, it's funny what you don't remember. What kind of slips your mind, or what never really lands when you're that age. But this that that that's part of what I want to, what I would, another random direction. But what I spent a good long while watching. There's a good long while during my teenage years where I would just, you know, bike to the movies, every weekend. I say as a point of pride that I watched the movie Casino on the same day I watched the movie Toy Story. I saw those in the theater, and it's like one thing I tried to do is I wanted to just I didn't even get snacks most of the time. I would just sit down, after having had 20 minutes of exercise to kind of get rid of a lot of the nervous energy. I spent 20 minutes, getting there. And then once I negotiated the ticket and everything, I would go to the theater. I would sit down and I would just be there. And one thing I didn't, I tried my best not to do. One thing I tried my best not to do would be to divide my attention. This was before cell phones, so there wasn't that distraction, at least. I might have a book or something to read, or a snack or something. Although I don't think I brought food much of the time. Um, but I would just sit down there and I would let the movie run. And I made it a point to pay attention because I understood that there was it's like you can pay attention to only so much at the same time. And if you've got your head filled of all kinds of things, all kinds of expectations and stuff, it's harder to enjoy things for what they are. You want to pay attention. You want to kind of just be there. And one thing about this whole woke thing, it's difficult for somebody who's doing that, I feel, to be present for the film, to watch things for what they are, not to hyper focus on things like, oh, it's a black actress. Now I'm hyper focusing on whether the jokes land instead of just relaxing and maybe seeing some of the things around, perceiving some of the situation around. So maybe it would land better if you were paying attention to this film for its own sake rather than just trying to pay attention to it to kind of to justify or debunk some outside argument. This is, I mean, if you don't like the message, if you don't like what it says, politically speaking, that's all right. But the thing about it is, you ought to give it as much of a chance, as much room in your mind when you're watching it as you can, so that you're not you know crapping on that movie for stuff it actually did, but you didn't have the presence of mind to notice. Like some people talk about plot holes where one you probably should have reconstructed that somebody would do something. Like, do you have to really be told that a person who's getting a bunch of guns, where they got their ammo? um Two, like, do you really have, you know it, if you're paying attention to what's going on screen and not talking with your friends and not, you know, looking at your phone, maybe you'll catch that event or that look that one character gave another that might signify something. Because filmmakers are subtle artists. They have to be. They're having to kind of, construct things out of performances, out of action beats, out of a whole bunch of different things. And so sometimes the details are subtle, and if you're not affording it your full attention, you might not see it. But it's also like you're going in and you're kind of filling in what you think the artist is saying. You've already you've already stuffed a story in there before you ever get to the movie theater. You've already uh, you've already made the decision on what this is supposed to mean, what that's supposed to mean. You've already kind of told the story to yourself, and this is a problem I have sometimes. I read this site called TV Tropes, which has a lot of spoilers in it, and so sometimes when I look at it, I get spoiled for things in other films, and it kind of drains some of the fun out of it to watch that film after that. And so it's like, okay, I've got to not spoil myself on this other work before I see it. I've got to watch it fresh. I've got to kind of, you know, let it flow into me, through my senses, so that I'm catching these details, but also so that I am building the story, reconstructing the story from the available material instead of trying to reconstruct the artist's intent from some pundit over there telling me what the artist's intent is. You know, you want eh, the artist will often tell you a lot about what they're actually thinking, about what they actually want to convey through the work. And so if you're, I mean, that's sort of, you know, what I did with First Man. When I went to see the theaters, see it in the theater, I sat down, let it wash over me, and I tried to discern, okay, what's he trying to tell me here? Okay, what's this looking, what is this, what is the import of this line here? It is a And by doing that, I was able to see, there's a lot of patriotism in this film. There's a lot of pride in America in this film. It's just not the main plot line here. It's not about how America did this amazing thing. This is the story of a man's personal journey from personal pain and tragedy to becoming this historic figure who is the first man to ever step on an alien world. And that is what they focus on, and focus on brilliantly. A lot of people denied themselves not just a perfectly good, but a pretty damn good movie for the sake of politics. They censored they censored the authentic version of the story in favor of another that they had been told, that they'd been fed, that they'd been indoctrinated with. And that's what's happening with a lot of this woke garbage. A lot of this. But also, how many times have I been in the comments section arguing with some people, and they tell me what I'm supposed to believe. This is part of the dangerous part of what folks are doing with all this indoctrination, of all this, oh, I'm just going to trust what Trump tells me directly with no intermediary, like I should be actually trusting what the president tells me, a politician tells me, rather than being skeptical about it. That's people are they're being fed this story. They're being fed a number of stories, a cinematic universe full of stories, but they're not reconstructing something like a it's not like a director's cut where you get these additional scenes that recontextualize things, that make new connections, that fill out characters, which is what I love in a director's cut. Like I've got among other things, I've got the my own copies of the Blu-rays of Lord of the Rings, the extended versions. I like that because that's that's the bigger story, the broader story that fills in a lot more of the details. You get that moment, you know, where the elven character introduces the elven city of Galathion, or however you pronounce it. Um, and it's like that broadens things, that changes things, but what it's broadening is a fictional story. So there's no crime in, turning and changing it. Where the real crime is when you try and remix reality, when you change, when you basically lie to people about what other people believe, what they want to do, what their intentions are, when you kind of filter their whole world through the ego and the point of view of one politician who's not got everybody's best interests at heart. And it's like that's where you get a situation where a whole bunch of people are willing to kill their neighbors for no good reason. Like in Rwanda, people they knew all their life. They trusted more somebody's nasty, slanderous picture of who their neighbors were rather than their own personal experience. People get crowded into these stories, these ideological tales that ultimately leave them estranged from those who actually would look out for them, who actually are loyal to them. And instead, the loyalties are to these, you know, politician strangers who, in real life, probably give next to no craps about them and only want them around for their votes. If your average Trump fan showed up at one of Trump's clubs to try and talk with him, he'd probably have them kicked out of the club. He's not a man of the people, but he's convinced so many people that he's not. He is the establishment. He is this real estate broker who was part of the New York elite for decades. And yet people, you know, entered into this story somehow think that he's this champion of the people. It's a story that has already killed, in its way, hundreds of thousands of people because they trusted him about a disease that was a lot deadlier than he told them it was. And he knew. He was told earlier, by Xi Jinping, this is worse than some ordinary flu, some ordinary thing. But nope, he didn't want to look. He didn't want the economy to collapse because it would make him look bad. He didn't want to cut off travel to Europe because he had golf clubs in Scotland he was trying to turn a profit on. He didn't want testing to be done at such a fast pace because that might show that there were more people infected, and that might not look well, that might not reflect well on him. And so you got all these decisions that are made in the name of storytelling tacts that people are taking, but they're taking these storytelling tacts with the real world rather than, instead of trying to shape the perception and the optics and the narrative about the real world, they actually do something in that real world that is effective, that does the job, and leave the question of how it looks to other people or to a later date. The irony is Trump may have gotten reelected if he had understood that the real thing that ultimately will shape a real life narrative is what really occurs, what actually happens. Because I can twist a story any number of ways, and maybe somebody believes that. But at the end of the day, what actually happens, creates evidence. What actually happened creates consequences. You don't need to tell that story. The story itself unfolds because true stories in the real world unfold from natural consequences, unfold from things that actually happen. And a person doesn't have to cobble it together, they don't have to, shape it and everything. They can, you do the work that you're supposed to do. And when that gets done, it creates consequences that make you look better. So if Trump had focused more of his time on actually dealing with the virus, containing the virus, if he had said, "Nope, we're not going to restrict testing just to the people coming from China and those who are symptomatic. We'll open it up. We'll test everybody coming in from all over the world, and we'll quarantine those who test positive, and then check their friends and family and quarantine those who test positive from them. And then in that way, you could at least slow the spread of the virus." But he's not interested in slowing the spread. He's interested in slowing the count of the spread. Here's a man who is demonstrating in a way that he doesn't know what to actually do, because instead of doing all the things that could actually, in the real world, help to stop the spread of the disease. He is instead trying to shape people's awareness of the disease, trying to shape people's count and objective, numbering of the people with that disease. He's shaping perceptions, manipulating perceptions rather than dealing with what's really going on. And because of that, hundreds of thousands of people died. You cannot replace a fact consequence with the consequences of a lie. If I tell you that if you drink this potion here, I give you a potion. Okay, here's a potion. Glunk, glunk, glunk. If I tell you that will cure you of COVID, if it's not real, it probably won't cure you. And if you've got a certain bit of genetics, there's a gene, a Neanderthal gene that some people have that if they have it, their body's defense against COVID is compromised. You know, they don't nip it in the bud like a lot of people do. That reality will have if Trump told you, you know, it's no big deal. That no big deal promise will not replace the hard time you're about to have with that disease. This is the thing. Storytelling is a good thing. It's a powerful thing. It's part of our adaptation as creatures on this planet. We can tell each other about things that are not present. We can relate wisdom about events that were way in the past. We can share memories. We can share thoughts and observations. That's part that all those are either part of storytelling or relate to our forms of storytelling. But part of the reasons why we developed this as ability was to be able to talk about all sorts of variable things in reality. However, that ability to kind of vary also allows us to lie with storytelling. Now we can do sort of good lies, sort of consensual lies, which we call, fictional stories, where it doesn't harm anybody that it's not true, at least not generally speaking. There are some specific things you might, misrepresent in a movie that might be bad. But the overall storytelling, you if you can imagine what's real, you can imagine what's not real. And one can replace the other in your head. But even if you replace, you know, a reality, a realistic story in your head with a delusion, that doesn't change what's out there. What's out there remains, and the consequences of that remain. So that's going to be it on this. I need to go get some milk because otherwise I won't be able to, you know, I'll have dry cereal in the morning. Ugh. But long story short, the power of storytelling is a double edged sword. And people need to be free to, people need to use that weapon, that tool for good. We don't need to be trying to counterfeit reality to suit our prejudices. And if we are listening to story, if we are experiencing a story, we need to let ourselves experience it in a more fluid, more open manner so that we actually get what was supposed to be conveyed. So I'm going to get my butt going. See you guys later.